This video is going to talk through an introduction to the fundamentals of probability from sections 11.4 and 11.6 in Math 120. Probability measures how likely an event is to occur, and it can be written as a fraction, a decimal, or a percent. Probability can range from 0 to 1, or if we're talking in terms of percents, 0% to 100%. A probability of 0 means that it is impossible for the event to occur, and a probability of 1 means that the event will definitely occur. Most of the time in the real world, probabilities are somewhere in between the 0 and 1, or 0 and 100%. Any event for which the outcome is uncertain is called an experiment. So for example, if I am actually flipping a coin, that is the experiment, flipping the coin, the action. The set of all possible outcomes of an experiment is the sample space of the experiment, and we usually denote it or abbreviate it with S. So if we're talking about flipping a coin, the sample space has two options. We can get heads or we can get tails. An event, which we abbreviate or denote with E, is any subset of the sample space. And the event is usually what we want to happen. So say we flip a coin and we want to get tails. Our E, or our event, would then be tails. So it has to be one of the things listed in the sample space if we actually want a probability that is not 0. When we are trying to calculate our theoretical probability, we use this definition. If an event E has n of E equally likely outcomes, and its sample space S has n of S equally likely outcomes, then the theoretical probability of event E, denoted by P parentheses E, is the number of outcomes in the event E over the total number of possible outcomes. So I realize that definition can be a little confusing and a little overwhelming. What we're saying, if we're reading it, would be the probability of E. So if we're using that example before, we would say like the probability of getting a tails. That's going to equal the number of outcomes in event E over the total number of possible outcomes. So how I usually think of that is the thing we want, how many ways that can happen, over the total number of things. So if we're thinking about the probability of getting a tails, there's only one way that can happen. So what we want can happen in one way. And there were two possible things, two total things that could happen. I could get a heads or I could get a tails. So the probability would be 1/2. The other thing we can talk about is the complement of an event. And the complement of an event is the probability that the event will not occur. If you see it written in symbols, it's usually the event with that apostrophe next to it. But most of the time in this class, we'll actually use the word not. And to find the probability of the complement of an event, we do 1 minus the probability that that event happens. Because if you think about it, 1 is that 100%. We're saying all of the possibilities. And then we're subtracting the probability that it does happen. That way we're just left with the probability that it does not happen. So if we stick with that last example, we want the probability this time that it's not tails. So we would do 1 minus the probability that it is tails. And whenever you're trying to find the complement or that not, I always write it out this way in words first. It helps kind of make sense of where everything's coming from. So then if we want the probability that we don't get tails, then it would be 1 minus that 1/2, the probability that we do get a tails, which just gives us 1/2. They're not always the same, but in this case, because there were only two possibilities, the heads or the tails, they're equal. They're each 50%.